Hello and welcome. My name is Miles Folsom, and this presentation is on the long-lost genius of W.B. Yeats. And I offer this interpretation in hopes of revealing the long-lost genius of W.B. Yeats. I also offer it in support of the long-lost souls seeking a way home. May my aim be as true to the mark as the mark is to my aim. The poem Leda by W.B. Yeats was written in October of 1923. That makes it 100 years old as of last month. In that 100 years, scholars have pushed and pulled on the poem and its meaning to make their own marks. And in due time, Leda, the poem, and the poor girl have become exhausted. Before we begin, I'd like to just give you a chance to review the poem. Just read it, take it in, read it again. Just get to know it for a second. The common interpretation of this poem, the one that you likely just encountered, is the carnal or physical interpretation. And it is truly the only one known of this poem. Authors and critics have made their mark by arguing certain points, but overall, there has been one single interpretation that is varied only slightly for the poem Leda. This interpretation is so common that I choose to address it only momentarily. You see, what happens in this version of the poem, this interpretation, the one that so quickly attaches to us on first read, is that we become caught up in the carnal elements of the text. As you read, you begin to imagine a make-believe scenario in where a woman is being assaulted sexually by a swan. Well, I have found a way out of this tightly themed interpretive box that critics have been trapped within for the last 100 years. Found my way out of it and into a new and fertile garden ripe with interpretation. The critic may argue that some of my interpretive choices are strained, or that I reach too far in assigning specific definitions to certain words within the poem. It's important for me to address this from the very start. You see, as I see it, one of the great things about a master of literature, such as W.B. Yeats, or John Milton, or Shakespeare, is that their vocabularies are profound in size and depth. Not only do these men and women know many words, they also know all of a word's definition and meaning. As we all know, some words will have a single definition, and some might even have 5 or 6 or 10. And so a master of literature usually knows multiple meanings for a word, if those meanings exist. And they know this, or rather they obtain this information almost intentionally in the performance of their artistry, because what a great artist is able to do is write syntax, write a paragraph, write sentence, write a story packed full of meaning. And a lot of times this meaning can come from words that are charged full of definition. A word that may look in multiple directions, or it may suggest a few different things rather than only one thing. When you get a word like that and you employ it in your sentence, you're able to create a sort of depth to your meaning and a bit of mystery, perhaps, to your meaning and what you're trying to get at. They sort of go hand in hand. So it's a way of complicating your writing, making it a little more sophisticated and entertaining, while the reader sort of wrangles with, what is it particularly that the writer is trying to get at? And, what definition is it even that the writer is particularly using? And so all that adds to the experience of reading a great writer, which is why great writers employ it. And so the fact that I go to any length to assign definitions that the modern interpretation of Leda doesn't assign to the words that are in it does nothing to harm my interpretation nor stop me to harm my interpretation or stop me to harm my interpretation. Yeats, having read Heraclitus, may agree that eyes and ears are poor witnesses if the soul does not know. Yeats may have agreed with Heraclitus, having analyzed the fragments that exist, that eyes and ears are poor witnesses of men when their souls do not understand the language. So it's important for me to point out that every definition I use and every assignment that I make is taken from a collegiate dictionary. Every word and assignment and definition that I choose in the creation of my meaning for Leda is sourced from a dictionary or from the material specifically created by W.B. Yeats, or from the work that is known to have been read by Yeats. I establish all my sources in precedent, and I verify all the knowledge that I use, unless otherwise stated, to have been within the reach of W.B. Yeats during his lifetime. And lest readers scoff at the difficulty of the feat that I will herein attempt, it should be noted that W.B. Yeats himself authorized such a feat when he talked about the antithetical or the creative man. And this is what he said. One can describe antithetical, creative man by comparing him to the commedia dell'arte, or improvised drama of Italy. The stage manager, having chosen his actor, the will, chooses for this actor, that he may display him the better, a scenario, body of fate, which offers to his creative mind the greatest possible difficulty that it can face without despair, and in which he must play a role and wear a mask as unlike as possible to his natural character or will, and leaves him to improvise through creative mind the dialogue and details of the plot. He must discover a being which only exists with extreme effort, when his muscles are as it were all taut and all his energies active. You'll see here that the original 1925 version is basically split into 3 sections. Now, for the sake of this analysis, I've decided to name each of these sections. And so the top 4 lines are called the banner. You see, they sort of stand atop the poem with a line break floating there as if a banner. The next group of lines I termed the body. It is because it is below the banner, but above what I term the backstop. It is the middle of the poem. And the final lines I called the backstop. Now, I call these the backstop because it is at this point, just after Agamemnon's name, when the line terminates and returns, and the theme and subject of the writing change. And what this means to me is that if a reader slips past this point without stopping at Agamemnon's name and questioning the truth of the interpretation that is suddenly changed, if the reader is oblivious and continues on, then there is no returning. The backstop changes the subject, and the reader is entangled in a new question. By dividing the poem up into these 3 parts, it allows me to more easily talk about them without using what would otherwise be very complicated poetic language that many of my viewers might not know. The myth of Leda describes what occurs in 2 ways. One account is of a consensual union between herself and the swan, and the other account of the myth is one of brutal rape, where Zeus sees Leda and decides that he wishes to take her as his consort, his mate, and so he comes down and embodies a swan so that he may get close enough to her to surprise her with his sexual attack. And he does just that. Now, no matter which version of the myth you take, consensual or non-consensual, the result is that Leda is impregnated by Zeus in the form of this swan. And Leda gives birth to Castor and Pollux and to Helen of Troy. An alternative version of the myth claims that Clytemnestra is actually the child of Leda and her husband, the Spartan general Tyndareus. Now, the entanglement of the first quarter interpretation begins when one identifies with one of the characters of the poem. That means that you may identify with Zeus and his predatory behavior, or you may identify with Leda and the victimhood and victimization that she undergoes in this encounter. But either way, as soon as you identify with one of these individuals, you become caught in the story that you've created in your head. You become caught in the images that you have decided to play out. See, the banner of the poem is written in such a way as to provoke these ideas of carnality and sexuality in our minds as readers. And if we do not stop them from taking charge and writing the story for itself, then in fact we fall to the first quarter interpretation. We take the one interpretation that is most apparent, and we are satisfied with it. We stop there. But it is a mistake, for there is more. There is another interpretation.